If you're in the data science and analytics space, making below six figures, here's how you can roughly double it in 18 months. I'm Nate, and I started my career at $17 an hour, and I hit 165K USD in 3 years. Knowing what I know now, here's the game plan to do it in 18 months. I'm going to outline 6 steps that you can take to get there in 18 months. Step 1, pick your domain. Specialists get paid more than generalists. Research the domain that you really want to get into, or at least you're interested in. So for example, maybe I'm a data analyst and I want to get into more of like the marketing domain. Do research, of course, as to like, if I want to get into marketing analytics, what that would entail. Likewise, you can do this for product analytics, more on the engineering side. So analytics engineering, so on and so forth. This will be just like your direction, right? When you're doing this research, there are a couple of things that you can look at. One thing that you can look at are the pay bands. So if you check LinkedIn, if you check Indeed, if you check Glassdoor, wherever else, some job postings, especially if they're posted in California, New York, will have a rough pay band as to what the job domain will pay. So for example, maybe I'm a data analyst and I'm like more of a generalist, but I'm more interested in marketing analytics, and that's where I kind of want to focus. Then, okay, well, the next step for me will be senior data analyst. But even more forward thinking than that would be like, oh, maybe a lead or a staff in the marketing analytics domain. So you can look at job postings that have the pay band, and you can kind of use that as a rough measure. So for a lead data analyst in the marketing domain, maybe it's anywhere from like 150 to 180. For a senior data analyst, maybe it's anywhere from 135 to like 155 or 160. And of course, these pay ranges are going to vary quite drastically depending upon like, if it's in a specific sector or not, company size and all of that. But you can get like a rough idea as to what you would expect. The second thing that you can do is also in this research is that, of course, these job postings will have these like job duties, job requirements. And typically what you'd want to do, and what you can also do, is reach out to people in this domain already of where you want to be. So like maybe you want to get to the lead data analyst level. It's always a little awkward just like cold approaching people, because of course like on the other side you just don't know the intent. But if you just like reach out to someone and be like, hey, I am so and so, I work in the analytics field. I want to get to the lead data analyst. Like, hey, I see that you're a lead data analyst, and I want to get that level, and especially in the marketing domain. Do you have a spare 15 minutes to link up so I can ask you some questions? And I think that's going to get better perceived than just, of course, well, first of all, than not reaching out, right? Because then you're not going to get any information there. And the other one thing is like, if someone reaches out to you about something like that, especially like, say you're already like a data analyst or an analytics engineer, then you're, probably more often than not, more than happy to help. So likewise, right? And it's also building network and connections as well. I've had a few people reach out to me, and I was more than willing to help out with these questions. So in regard to like the job requirements, what you can do is, again, like check the top roughly 3 to 5 non-negotiables of a job posting. Because so typically what happens is that a hiring manager is going to create the job requirements, and then HR kind of does like the final versioning of the job posting. And a lot of these requirements, you can kind of identify those 3 to 5 like non-negotiables, right, in a job description. But a lot of the other stuff is going to be noise, right? So it's kind of up to your discretion to figure out what those kind of like 3 to 5 non-negotiables are. And really you can kind of start to see a trend between job postings, because from job to job, in regard to a specific domain, like in marketing and product, you'll start to see kind of similar things. So like on the marketing side, for example, what you'll see more often than not is like basic stuff from like conversion rate, click-through rate, kind of like funnel metrics, all the way to CAC, LTV to CAC ratio, payback period, all of those stuff, metrics. And also like working with specific data from paid social like Meta, TikTok, YouTube, or email lifecycle companies like Braze or something like that, right? You'll start to understand between job postings what are kind of like the key things, key commonalities across those jobs in your domain. This leads us into step two. So reverse engineer the role. So like I said, non-negotiable job requirements and kind of build up a list of where you think the gaps are for you. So what I mean by that is that say you're a data analyst and you're kind of more of a generalist and maybe you just don't have exposure to like paid social data, for example, like using like Meta and figuring out like the CACs, cost of acquisition, and so on and so forth. So you can identify that that's a gap that you need to kind of fill so you can get to that next level. The other thing I'll also add is that if you're able to become not just a domain expert in regard to like business metrics and your external partners, but also about the data itself. If you can learn like fact dimension tables, Kimball style data modeling, and it doesn't have to be super, super in detail, but if you can get to that level, especially in your domain, so whether it's marketing or products, then you become like the de facto expert in your specific domain because you can talk to the entire lifecycle all the way from where it lands in your database data warehouse all the way to the end user. And you become just an asset like that, being able to talk to the entire lifecycle. It's not something that's really needed more, especially a little bit earlier on, but if you want to get to that like lead level, staff level, that's definitely like a non-negotiable for sure. Because from my experience, especially working in the industry for 7, going on 8 years, like those data analysts or data scientists who understand the data architecture really do stand out. And again, it's not like you have to become an expert in data engineering by any means, because that's kind of like outside the scope, but really just understanding the structure of the data. I think that's really it's really something that helps candidates really stand out. And it's also more than likely than not correlated with compensation. All right. In this latter part, and this kind of gets into step 3, but so this step 3, there's kind of like an intermediate step between step 2 and step 3. And that is kind of getting alignment with your boss as to how you can fill in the gap of where you want to go. So for example, you're a data analyst and you want to get to senior data analyst. You need to really be clear to your to management or to your boss. As to first of all, your desire to get to the next level. And second thing is, what sort of things do I need to do to get to the next level? This is going to depend like case by case by company, but there are kind of 2 things at play here. One thing, and it's related to the former, is that no one's going to be your biggest advocate except for yourself. Like you're going to be your own, you are essentially your own biggest advocate. No one's going to know that, you really want to get to the next level aside from you, right? Because if you don't kind of like mention it, then people are going to be pretty laissez-faire about it. So you got to be your own biggest advocate there. And second is that you not only do you have to kind of express interest of like, hey, I want to get to the next level, but also like, how do I get to the next level? Because essentially what happens in a promotion cycle is that you need evidence. You need evidence that, hey, this person's meeting this specific expectations and they're already here. Thus, they do a review and see if they're, eligible to get promoted. So you essentially need to build up that evidence. And ideally you're doing that with your boss, but, depends on company, depends on culture. Perhaps that's not always the thing perhaps that's not a situation that you can be in, but idealistically, this would be kind of like the first step to getting to that next level. And if it doesn't happen, I'll talk a little bit later, but this is kind of like your kind of intermediate step, identifying the gaps, getting alignment with management as to like, hey, I want to get to the next level, essentially identifying how to fill in those gaps. Once you get through this leads into step 3. So build evidence in your domain. And of course, this is related to the former step. So of course, you want to get real projects at work if possible. Right. So like, again, with the example of like the marketing domain, being a generalist, you want to get into like, say, for example, marketing analytics. Ask your boss if you can get on these like specific projects. If not, then you're not out of luck. Don't worry. What you can do is work on side projects, which is ideal, but ideally you'd be getting paid to do these projects, but or picking up like additional projects. But if not, you can work on side projects. So in some cases it'll work out. In some cases you'll have to do case studies. So for example, if you want to get more into like web analytics, right? There's BigQuery public data sets that you can use that has these like pseudo fake data sets that contain like session level data. There are cases where it's going to be a lot more difficult. So for example, like product analytics and experimentation design. Public data sets for A/B testing, I'm not too sure if there's a lot. There might be maybe on Kaggle or someplace, but I think more realistically, you just have to look at case studies and maybe perhaps read like books or blog posts, or honestly ask like ChatGPT or something like that on experimentation design and really just kind of like study it. This really comes down to three things, right? First thing, hey, if I get on a project, that's ideal. Second thing, if I can't get on a project, I can work on a side project outside of work, and hopefully there's data out there for that. Third thing, which isn't the most ideal, but it still can work, are case studies, essentially. So you're not complete out of luck, but this is kind of like the rank order of ideal scenario for building evidence in your domain. The fourth thing, which is related to the prior step, is checking in with your manager as to where you currently are and how you are progressing. You don't want to wait until like your annual review just to review like how I'm progressing, especially when in regard to your career, because it's not like wasting precious time per se, but ideally you want to be on track, and you don't want to just check in on how you're on track every year, because that's kind of like you can be pretty far off on a year-to-year basis. Idealistically, just probably work with your manager to set like specific check-ins, whether if it's weekly, which might be too frequent, or just quarterly. I think it's worth just having those conversations. And that kind of also indicates to your boss like, hey, I'm really taking charge here. And I think it's a good quality, especially as a lead or as a leader. What you want to do is also like kind of go through your kind of checklist of things and see how you're progressing. And, if things are kind of off course, how can you correct course? So maybe a few projects actually kind of came up last minute in the previous quarter, which you weren't able to get to your project that you really wanted to do. So, ask like, okay, well, is this timeline kind of more realistic? Can I get onto this project for next quarter? Or if you have hit those projects and those like timelines, then are there any other bits of evidence that I can add to get to that next level? And also look for kind of specific feedback as well. Like when getting feedback, sometimes it feels it's a little bit hard to digest without hitting the ego. But I think, just being open to feedback, I think just is a good quality to have, especially if, you're trying to get into this more of like a growth mindset, right? Just being open to things and think about things more objectively and not specifically to yourself, because who you are at work is totally going to be different than who you are kind of outside of work. So you kind of have to make those distinctions, and it's really hard to like separate those things out. But at the end of the day, without burning out, that's just something that you have to do, at least in my perspective. So this leads me into step 5. Understand the market economics. Ideally, you'll be working with your boss relatively closely on kind of like filling in the gap and get to the next level. And roughly, for a rough timeline like this will probably take maybe like a year to a year and a half, right, to fill in that gap of evidence and in order to get like promoted internally. But, oftentimes you might have the evidence, but you just don't get promoted for whatever reason, right? And if that does occur, then it might warrant to look kind of outside, look externally. And typically getting a promotion kind of externally, getting to that next level, so like data analyst to senior data analyst, typically we should net around like a 20 to 30% increase on average. Internal promotions can roughly follow like anywhere from like 10 to 15, maybe 20%. But as you can see, right, there's a pretty big delta between the two. by like nearly like a half. If you build up enough evidence to get to the next level, what you can do is look for an external promotion. You don't have to be just constrained to an internal promotion. Of course, you really want to assess if it's the right move for you, because especially in 2026, like the job market for people with experience, it's not great, it's not bad, it's pretty like nascent. But like from that peak hiring period, like during and a little bit after COVID to now, I've actually seen some roles actually like kind of decrease on average, the pay band. So again, it depends on your circumstance. Typically, unless you're laid off, of course, I would be, especially in this market, I'd try to stay probably at least 2 years at a company. And if it works out, obviously stay longer if it makes sense. And again, the reason being is that job switching, like it was back in like 2019, 2020, or 2020, 2021, doesn't really pay back as much as it did. So again, take that with what you will. But again, if you built up the evidence and you've worked really closely with your boss, and there's nothing kind of internal your way, and you're really kind of looking for that promotion, then oftentimes than not, you're just going to have to look externally. But now you have the evidence. And that leads me into step 6, which is that decision point. So by the latest by month 18, if you've identified and filled in the gaps and built the evidence, and your employer isn't acknowledging it within a reasonable time frame, so probably roughly around 12 to 18 months, then that's your signal to start looking externally. Even if it hits like 12 months and you think you built out the evidence and I think you're good to go, like, and maybe you're in a situation where it's just like maybe it makes more sense to look externally, or that's what you're thinking, don't wait. You can always interview and take your time at it, right? Like perhaps you're at month 12 and still have a job, and you're just going to take your time interviewing, and really you can just wait until you have like a solid offer. You don't have to take the first offer, of course, that you get. Definitely don't wait until you hit like month 18 for that evidence. Like you can, as early as you can, if you think you have the evidence and you filled in the gap enough to get to the next level, go ahead and do it. You can take your time at finding the next role for yourself. A little bit of a bonus round. Here's what not to do. So, if you're trying to progress further in your data career, get paid more, what you don't want to do is kind of like cert stack. You can look at different certificates, different boot camps, all of that. I've honestly never have received a certificate in data analytics. When I'm looking for candidates, or like as a hiring manager, or even just feedback, getting certificates doesn't really, no one really cares at all about certificates. I know there's like IBM, and there could be certificates in regard to a good way of studying for sure, but when employers are looking for candidates, they're not looking for certificates, that's for sure. Unless it's something very, very niche, then it could warrant it. So perhaps this is like a very rough example, but if I'm hiring a like Tableau consultant, perhaps I would be just as like additional proof. Maybe I'll be looking for a Tableau certificate, but that's like a very, very kind of niche instance, and that's a very, very specific kind of job that I would be looking to apply for if I was in that area of expertise specifically. The other thing, what not to do, is waiting to be noticed. So, you work really hard and you're getting on all these projects and you're super gung-ho, but either no one's noticing or your boss notices, but not like you're getting just more projects, right? Just more work, and perhaps it's a use case to get promoted, but if you haven't had that conversation with your manager before, then, it's not to say it won't happen, but ideally everyone will be on the same page. So don't wait to be noticed. Be proactive and have an open conversation with your manager. I think that's really the key thing. And, again, if you're not having that conversation or your manager's not open, then, there are ways around that too. If you made it this far and you liked the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Definitely would mean a lot to me. And then feel free to leave comments as to what other topics you'd like me to chat through in regard to data analytics. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.